welcome. Welcome to the next in our Lunch and Learn panel series. It's brought to you by Profitmaster Global Outsourcing, providing premium offshoring solutions. My name's Paul Jansz. If you haven't been on one of these before, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. It's fantastic to have you here as we talk through probably the next in this series. You know, we started this series about 4 months ago now, 5 months ago, with Richard Croker and Derek Gallingmore. We were talking about all sorts of different topics at the time, and I suppose this one's a really interesting topic because I've seen our guest, Delia MacKenzie, present this in the past, and she's presented it twice, and I think it's been brilliant. And I thought, well, for people, you know, I get a lot of different, whether it's financial planners or accountants or just business people in general saying, look, if I was going to find an offshore staff member, where do I start? What do I do? How do I prepare? So it's those sorts of things that we're going to talk about today as well. So we'll run through the top 5 reasons. We'll probably be online for about 30, 40 minutes. If you've got any questions, please throw those into the Q&A. So I will be moderating that, looking at any questions you've got. So if something pops up in your mind and you want to throw it in there, please throw it in there. Although we'll also provide time at the end of this to review any of the questions that we may have. Now, let me introduce you to our panel member. It is Delia MacKenzie. I mentioned that before. Delia, how are you? Welcome.
Hi, Paul. Thanks very much. Yes, very excited to be on the Lunch and Learn today.
Yeah, fantastic. You're probably usually on the other end. You're probably listening in, but now that you're a panelist today, which is probably a different angle.
Yes, I'm normally taking notes of people's questions and addressing them. So it's interesting to be on this side of the panel.
100%, 100%. And look, what we're going to go through today is we'll touch on one of the key terms that I know that I got out of Derek when Derek was on this a few months ago was, you know, how to build your global workforce. And he spoke a lot about global workforce. You know, we're all sort of pushed, whether it be cost, whether it be efficiencies, whether it be how we improve productivity. They're all key drivers that we're going to talk about today. So I've mentioned Derek, but if you've missed any of the first, I think this is our 4th or could be our 5th. I've actually forgotten which one it is as well. If you've missed any of the ones we've run in the past, jump onto our YouTube page, jump onto Profitmaster Global Outsourcing. Up will pop the Lunch and Learn panel series, and you'll see the first one, the second one, the third one. I think this is the 4th. So if you want to go back and have a look at that, all of that type of education as well is all on our YouTube page. So please jump into that and have a look at it. Delia, before we kick off, and I know I mentioned before that you've presented a couple of these before and a couple of different groups that I've seen you present, and it's been very, very good. Are you okay just to share a little bit about you and why you've decided to share the top 5 reasons, I suppose?
Sure. So a little bit about me. I am based in Melbourne and I'm the Director of Growth and Engagement at Profitmaster. I've been with Profitmaster for about 18 months. And I was actually with a different offshoring company before. So I've seen a variety of things that work and that don't work. And it's all learning and progress. So I've learned a lot along the way. And I just thought that sharing the top 5 reasons would be helpful for businesses because businesses still have a lot of what I call DFCs, doubts, fears, and concerns. And it's just a way of addressing them and really showing how offshoring has grown. It's sort of in the last 30 years gone from being what would have probably been considered a somewhat frowned upon fringe alternative to now being a really mainstream choice when businesses are considering their staffing strategy. So hope we can cover off on some of those reasons, like you mentioned on how do you go from having the staff member to having that vision of building a team, a remote team.
I like the DFCs.
DFCs.
Fears and
doubts,
concerns.
fears, and concerns.
Yeah, look, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I know I get a lot of different people that talk to me based on what I do. So they talk to me about interesting things. Now, I've never thought about from doubts, fears, and concerns, but they are, aren't they? I know there's been some, let's call it some sort of businesses that have outsourced a task, and we'll talk about this soon as well, where they might outsource a task, but they haven't actually jumped to actually having a resource. And how do you move from, let's say, a task which could be an hourly rate, could be a marketing task, could be a bookkeeping task, to then having a marketing resource or having a bookkeeping resource. those are the sorts of things that we want to sort of break down. And you coming from the businesses that you deal with is going to be fantastic, whether that be, and you can sort of work through the different, but I'm assuming that there's financial planners, accountants, bookkeepers, engineering companies. I know a mate of mine runs an engineering company and they offshore as well. They've got people that do their back end, car dealerships. There's all sorts of different businesses that are always looking to create efficiencies, aren't they?
Yes, I don't think it's restricted. The global workforce sort of covers so many different capabilities. It's just a case of working out for each business what the best role is for them to have done offshore.
Let's start with some economic factors. What are some of the economic factors that drive efficiency?
I think globally there've been so many changes. The global economy, local economy have all changed a lot in recent times. And one of the biggest changes I would say that's meant you can be efficient with offshore staff is the change in technology. So again, over sort of the last quite a few number of years, it's been improving and things have become cloud-based. So you can connect and communicate with staff across the globe now in a way that just wasn't possible. So that efficiency of connection and communication through technology has certainly, I would say, been one of the things that has been a big driver. Another one in more recent times has been COVID. That was in some ways a blessing for offshoring, because businesses, as you say, all sorts of businesses were set up, accountants, financial planners, mortgage brokers, they were set up so that they could work remotely, but they didn't want to, like they didn't really want to let their staff work from home or want to test what remote work would look like. And then particularly in Melbourne, COVID forced us to work from home, and it forced businesses to really test the technology, test the efficiency, test the productivity, and see whether you could work with staff being remote. And I think the outcome of that was that it didn't always work, certainly, but if you had the right person, they could work from anywhere. And if you've got the right systems and the right person, they really could work from anywhere. So
Yeah, well,
I think when I speak to industries, like you mentioned, the ones, accountants, financial planners, it comes down to the costs, efficiencies and the cost of hiring, the challenge of finding and keeping good people, and then the challenge of finding old-fashioned hardworking people who come with a want to learn and unentitled attitude, and then getting productivity out of them. And particularly, again, I suppose I'm slanted a bit to Melbourne, staff have been unwilling to go back to the office. So getting productivity from staff who aren't always in the office can be a challenge.
Yeah, I agree. It's a funny thing, isn't it? Because I was with another business up in Brisbane only last week, and we were talking about the change in management mindset as well as team mindset since COVID. And I know the team up in Brisbane, they probably weren't as locked down as what we were down here in Melbourne. But I think the whole mindset has changed. And I agree with you there. The ability for businesses to think outside the square to get those efficiencies, and to know that, you can actually have really good people working for you, whether they're at home, whether they're, we could be in Melbourne, you could have a resource in Perth. You could have a piece, you could have a resource in the Philippines. You might find that, and I'm sure a lot of businesses do this, where team members take mat leave and suddenly they want to work from home. I think the options have more opened up, certainly with what you mentioned there, with what's happening in the cloud now. We're all working in the cloud, aren't we?
Yes. And the options, people now realize that the capabilities of staff in other countries is so great that they probably didn't trust that you could find the right skills, that there's a huge talent pool. And as Profitmaster, we're in the Philippines, but Sri Lanka, India, South Africa, Nepal, so many countries actually have really skilled people. And, they've got great qualifications, they've got industry experience, and just more and more people are working out that there's a skills shortage, and you can actually find people in other countries that can have the skills that you need.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I know another business that I spoke to only 2 weeks ago were talking about how they'd managed to do it. And while they didn't, and I know we're going to talk about successes and how you get it wrong, and they spoke about how initially they didn't get it right, but it was about how they persist, because that was a part of their plan to build that out, almost like their back office was being built out, and they were making more of their front office, their team here, let's say, more revenue generating. So they had the best of both. They thought, well, if we can get our back office being done offshore at a cheaper price, and we turn our front office people into revenue generating people, well, it's a win-win, and that created greater profitability for them. So little things like that are so important, especially as we head into 2025 and people strategizing over what does my team look like for the next 2 or 3 years.
Yes, no, that's certainly when we look at how to offshore successfully, it starts with that first point of who do you have here and are they being utilized in the best possible way?
Well, maybe let's have a quick chat about that. We might come back. I know that might shuffle around the things we were going to talk about, but let's talk about the how to set up offshoring for success and some of the dangers where we can get it wrong, but how do people continue to move forward with that?
Okay. So I would say the first step to setting up successfully is working out what you can or can't offshore successfully. And the most common trap we find is that people try to offshore their problems. And for example, the business might be struggling with their lead generation or their conversion, and it's a headache and they want to get rid of it. So they think, I'm just going to get someone offshore to do it. But if it's an offshore staff member that's, working just for you, it's not a good strategy because you don't have a successful process in place for them to copy. If you've been able to do a task onshore successfully, you're more likely to have realistic guidelines, realistic benchmarks and expectations. And then both you and your offshore staff member will know what the goal is, what good looks like. So just going back to what you were saying, I think the first step is to look at who you've got onshore and take tasks away that they already know how to do so that they can monitor and control. So look at your onshore team. Are they being utilized in the best way? Like you say, are they sitting at their desk doing compliance, admin, process type work? And could they be, doing more lead generation in terms of business development? Just talking to the existing clients. A lot of lead generation just comes from looking after your existing clients, and they could be spending their time doing that. I'd say also for businesses who are considering offshoring to actually ask their staff onshore if they're enjoying what they're doing, because quite often a lot of a role is sitting at your desk, getting through paperwork and admin, and people hate it, but they do it because they have to. It's part of the role. But could they maybe grow in their role and get into a more advisory or client relation role and then separate out that admin desk-bound stuff? So I would say get your onshore staff to do a diary, like a desk diary. How much time do you spend in a week at your desk? And then from that, try to create roles that somebody else could be doing, as you said, much less of a cost offshore.
Yeah, it's a great example actually, because given that I've been coaching accounting firms for the last 20 odd years, I know that accountants that are listening to this would know that they, and lawyers do it as well, they measure by time. So whether it's your 6-minute increments, and we know exactly where time has been spent, which is then gets charged out. But there's always a layer of administrative tasks that you just spoke about. So the mindset is, could you pass on those administrative tasks to a lower end resource and have your higher end still charge out at the whatever, $150, $200, $250, $300 an hour, which will give you greater revenue. And I think you mentioned before, I think working with team members, the first thing they'll tell me, and if there's managers or team members listening to this, you might have heard this as well, I don't have the time. So they don't have the time to do what you just said with regards to following up clients, to asking for referrals or asking for Google reviews, or doing that little bit of, a lot of people talk about leaving money on the table with existing clients. We're always searching for a new client, but we forget about the ability to that, would you like fries with that, the type of McDonald's mentality. And it stems growth mainly because team members say, I don't have the time for that. So there's just something to think about. If you guys are online and you're talking to your team members, I agree. The comment you just made there about chatting to team members and also making the team members feel secure that we're not replacing you with an offshore staff member. How important is that?
That's so important that, we're not replacing you, we're supporting you so you can do advice work and they can do the compliance side, but you're still going to look after it. Like back to what you should offshore tasks that you know how to do, you know how to measure, you know what productivity rates you need to get to, because then they can be done successfully. And for onshore, it should be seen, yes, as a support rather than a replacement or a threat.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be really important, because I think the ability for team members to sit here and we're going to start offshoring, and I've sort of seen it in other meetings as well, where the person that may be managing that gets a little bit, oh, well, does that mean I'm going to lose my role type of mentality? And unless we explain that, that's what they'll think.
It is the immediate, again, concern out of the doubt spheres and concerns. Businesses, the existing staff are like, oh, offshore, the word means that my role's going and, I'm not going to be needed, or it's going to be a negative for them.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of the engaging with the team. I think that's a great piece of advice, where you can get the team on board of how we build this out with everybody knowing that their role is not at danger. So there's sort of some of the things where if you don't get that right, we spoke about getting things right and probably the dangers of getting it wrong. I think that could lead, if you don't get that communication piece right, that could be dangerous for your business.
Also because you need the support of onshore to bring offshore under their wing, for them to feel like they're part of the team. And if you've got resistance from onshore, it's hard to make your team gel. And in the end, you do want them to work really well and closely together. So getting that initial buy-in from your onshore team, I'd say, is critically important.
Yep, agree. And the example I gave of the mate of mine that runs the engineering company before, he's worked out where he's got about 20 team members. They're all pretty well, they're surveyors, they're on site, they're earning their hourly rate. They hate administrative work. Okay, so one of the things that I asked him about that, he goes, oh, mate, they just hate admin work. So if they're not good at it, well, they've been doing it, how about we take it away from them? That means I can charge them out. If they're doing 40% admin work, because they've got to, everything needs to be done after a job. Well, if that can go somewhere else and get done, and they can just spend more time effectively earning that hourly rate. So, again, it's taken a little while for them to get that, but it's working for them really well at the moment.
Oh, exactly.
Let's talk about the old people model versus the service model. And I sort of mentioned before let's call it outsource versus offshoring. Are you okay to just expand a little bit more on that? Because when you spoke about this the first time, it was quite fascinating for me, and I've gone, and that's when I probably got it. So, and hopefully everyone online might get the same thing, which I got only recently.
Sure. I think it's a really important one, because people are hesitant on the whole to offshore because they fear they're going to lose control over how work is done, and that the quality of work that they're giving to their clients is going to be affected. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around what staff in another country means. Like there's so many terms: BPO, offshoring, outsourcing, having a VA, seat leasing, staff leasing. There's so many. As an industry, we haven't sort of got it clear in terms of the wording. So understanding each of the different terms, because they do all mean something slightly different, is quite important when you're trying to work out what you need and what will suit you best. So the two main ones that I try and cover off on are outsourcing and offshoring, because they're the ones you hear about most, but they're actually quite different when you break them down. So outsourcing is a service model. It's where you approach an outsource company and they have got an existing team of trained staff behind them. So you might talk to me and you tell me that I want my tax returns done, or my BAS, or I want you to build me a website. And with outsourcing, you can outsource your problems, because I, as an outsource company, have got trained specialists depending on what my focus is. I might be a web developer, or I might be, an outsourced tax specialist. and I'll have my team trained, and you come to me and you say, I'd like these tasks done, and we agree on an hourly rate or a per job rate, and you trust that you just let me put the person on the job because I've trained them. So it's really convenient in that you pay per task or per hour, and the staff are ready to go. You're not involved in the selection and you're not involved in the training. But it can be quite frustrating because you might send one file and you get it done really well. You get a great result, times, frames, excellent. And you send something similar and you get a completely different result because I'm allocating to my team. You're not actually controlling who's doing the work. And the team are all trained in a one-way, same-way model. So they don't really invest in getting to know your businesses or your processes because they're spending the morning with you, afternoon with somebody else, the next day with somebody else, because it's that one way, same way cookie cutter style. And I think there's also more of a risk of security because on their laptop, they've got your information, the next company's information, and you trust that the offshore provider has got security in place, but you don't have oversight. You don't have sort of direct control of that. So I describe that outsourcing as a one-size-fits-all transactional model. And it can be what businesses start with if they don't need that much work done. They just have a little bit that they need done, and it's not worth them hiring a whole person, so to speak. Yes. But the contrast to that is offshoring is a people model where you are actually building a team and finding the right people to be in that team, but they're in another country. But with this model, you would give a job description of exactly what you're looking for, exactly what systems you would like them to have had experience, the level of experience in the industry you would like them to have, and then you're involved in the interviewing and actually choosing the person who's going to become part of your team. So they learn your processes, your procedures, you communicate directly with them. In the offshore model, you're dealing with the offshore provider and they talk to their team, whereas in the outsourcing, with offshoring, there's direct communication with you on a daily basis with your staff members. So that's sort of the most immediate relationship. And then once you've chosen someone, they're only working for you. They're not moving on to another client or being promoted into a different business. They are very much like if you're hiring onshore. They're your staff for all intents and purposes, but you don't have that hassle of actually having to employ them in Australia. They're employed in the country that they reside in.
Yep. Fair call. And look, to everyone's online, I've got a couple of polls coming out soon as well, but you raised an interesting point, which was around data security and IT, because you're right. When you think about that task that you sometimes might outsource, and I don't know if this happens, but I'm thinking this happens, you might outsource the task and that company might offshore it to somebody else. So then is there a problem, I suppose, when it comes to data security and IT, as you just mentioned?
So yes, when you outsource, the staff doing the work could be onshore or offshore. You don't necessarily know where the work is getting done. And then the outsource company would need to have security protocols to look after the privacy, because there is, particularly for the types of companies we work with, which is financial and professional services, as a broad generalization, as I say, a lot of car dealerships and body corporates, other companies too, but as a core, financial and professional services where data security is really important. So in an offshoring model, you can control or you understand from your offshore provider exactly what those security protocols are, whereas you're not as close to it in an outsourcing model. It's up to the outsource provider to have those in place, but it's, again, one size fits all. You hope that they're in place, but you don't actually have access to tracking it.
Yeah. Fair call. And I think they're the important things, I suppose. And that's how much, when you're talking to businesses about this, how important is that IT data aspect?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably the most important thing. In that doubts, fears, and concerns, that's the biggest fear. That's the biggest fear, that is my data going to be safe? Are we compliant with Australian cyber and privacy laws? Which, yes, we are a Profitmaster, but you need to make sure whichever provider or whichever outsource offshore option you're going with, are they compliant? ISO 27001 being compliant with that is a gold standard in IT security. So that's a very good question to ask. And think some of the steps just in terms of things to watch out for in IT security is to make sure that your offshore provider's got an IT team and that there's someone on the ground who sets up the systems and security in conjunction with you or your IT team in Australia, but that before the staff's first day, before they're accessing anything, you've had an audit and you're very comfortable with the security. There should be basic things that the staff don't use their own computer, that they are provided with a computer, and they don't access anything personal on their work computer or anything work on a personal computer. There needs to be very close management and control over passwords. So using things like Practice Protect is a very popular to work with them. Or there are other password managers, so it's not the only one, but we work very closely with Practice Protect. The staff need to be monitored, and I think this is an interesting one from an IT security and a productivity perspective. In the Philippines, you have much closer monitoring. So you have software on the devices that monitors screenshots, keystrokes, can really report on activity, that the staff are being productive as well as what they're actually doing. So you can keep a very close track of where they're going, where they're spending their time, what sites are they're visiting. You can get reports on all of or any abnormal activity. So that's really important, and particularly important if your staff are working from home, because if they're in an office, they have a team leader or management with them. But when they're working from home, that software is really important from an IT and from a security perspective. And then also with the working from home, and if you try to hire directly, this is really tricky, but you need someone to go and see what their working from home environment looks like. If they're working in the villages, they can be in a tiny room with really not a work conducive space, a lot of distractions, and just simple disruption can happen where there's power outages. A lot of weather comes through the Philippines. So really understanding what power do they have, what sort of internet do they have, and then having them locked down that they can only work in their home environment, that they can't just go to any old cafe or friend's house and be accessing your information from wherever they like. So those are sort of some of the really important things. And then the other ones are just locking down websites, so they can't access obviously emails, Gmail, Hotmail, any of their personal emails. And depending on the role, so if it's a marketing role, they will need to access websites and social media and things, as I say, depending on the role. But you can very much control what's whitelisted and blacklisted in terms of website access. And also, as I say, storing into your cloud systems, disabling the USB and not storing locally is really important to clients to know that that's cleared and that the information is stored in the same place that information from their Australian staff would be storing it. It's not stored long term somewhere else.
And all of that just then in that last 5 minutes, and the great part about this to everyone listening, if you haven't been able to even maybe write that down, what Delia just mentioned, the recording will be available in a couple of days' time once it comes out of post-production. But I think those sort of things are so important to get right, because otherwise it puts business at risk, data at risk, and that's not what we want. And I think knowing where people are working, and you're right, things like, I don't know, backup generators, if the power does go out, those sorts of things are just critical, aren't they?
Yeah, and that's what people don't necessarily think about. They think, oh, it's cheaper to hire direct. I'm just going to find someone and hire them direct and they can work from home. And they can, but the disruption and the risk involved in that is like,
you got to weigh that
probably
up.
worth a couple of $100 extra to get them in an office where you know what the power and backup and support is, and you just can really reduce your risk.
Yeah. And the other important point, knowing the Filipino market, I suppose, not as well as maybe what you know it is, when they're in the office, it builds an amazing culture, doesn't it? Because they're such a family orientated type of culture that they like being around each other, and the way they participate in certain ways in the office is very different to how you would do it at home.
Yes, I think that's right. They're very family orientated, and for them, working in a culture that they feel supported, that they create, similar to here, that they make friends and that they actually enjoy coming to work, then it becomes not just about the salary. They're actually choosing to stay at work because they like the environment, and additional benefits do come into it. So things like engagement activities, private health insurances, life insurances, transport, a meal at lunch, all of those sort of soft benefits add up to a lot. We've asked our staff what the thing they like most about coming into the offices, and they've said that they've got a catered meal every lunch is a really important thing. And it's not a huge addition. It adds up a bit, all these benefits, but it's gold in terms of creating a place that the staff like to come and that keeps your attrition low.
Yeah, that's so important, isn't it? Because little things like that mean a lot. We probably don't, as Australians, we probably don't value it as much as what they would in their culture.
Yes, no, they do. I had we were in the Philippines for our 10-year conference just recently, and I had a lovely story from a staff member who her role had actually stopped because there'd been some structural changes with the client who'd been, I think, taken over, and they didn't need the offshore staff. So I asked her what she was going to do next, and whether she'd applied for lots of other jobs and where she was going to go. And she said no, she had so enjoyed the culture and the friends and the support that she had in the office here that she wanted to do contract work, just part-time contract work, until we could find her another role. And that it's worth enough to not just look to move, that she wanted to stay, so wanted to just wait until the right role came up. And I think that's if you can create that sort of a culture, it goes a long way.
Absolutely, it's so true. Let's talk about, we spoke about the importance of data security, and your feedback on that was outstanding. Let's talk about the all-important costs, because you're right. You mentioned before, some people think they go a cheaper option, but then it puts the business at risk. Are you okay to talk about this? I know I think you put up a comparison. Last time I saw it, you did a bit of a cost comparison to an Australian team member. Are you okay to talk about the all-important savings?
Sure. And I think it is a big topic to cover, because really, when people offshore, that tends to be the main reason they want to offshore, is because the cost is less. The cost of salary is significantly less offshore, but there are a lot of elements that come into cost that need to be considered. So certainly the first part is the cost of the salary. So offshore, and I'm not sure about all the different offshoring countries, but in the Philippines, the offshore cost of the salary and statutory benefits is about 30 to 40% of what it would cost to hire someone, the salary of someone onshore with the same level of experience. But then with offshore, there's a cost for the management team. So that's the HR, having an operations manager, IT, and the office costs. So that all goes in to the total offshore cost. And it depends a little bit whether the staff are working in the office, hybrid, or working from home. So they generally those three options. But once all the offshore costs are added up, it works out on average about half of what it would cost to hire the same person with the same level of experience onshore. But that's just the onshore salary. So people tend to not compare apples with apples, because outside of salary, you've got to consider what are your other costs of employment. So if you're comparing total cost of employment onshore, you would need to consider your office, your stationery, computer, transport, what training do you give your staff, what team building you do, engagement costs. And that's also before Australian employment taxes. So it's not many businesses actually work that number out. What's your total cost of employment, rather than just your salary onshore, and then comparing that to what your offshore cost is. And I think offshore, yes, if you work with an offshore partner, there are those office costs, but they're much less than if you decided to go offshore and set up your own office, because there's a huge headache, a lot of admin bureaucracy to even register a business over there, and then to set up an office and set up a management team. There, that's a lot more cost and hassle than walking into an office that's set up and you can scale really quickly. All you need to do is find the right people, the desks are there, the management team's there, and you can really scale your business fast. So when you compare costs, you're comparing two things, basically offshore to onshore, and then offshore doing it yourself offshore versus offshore working with an offshore partner. So yes, it is a complex one, but comparing apples with apples is a challenge. We have to break it down.
And I think that's important for everybody that's listening, that always make sure you are comparing apples with apples, and all of those different. If you're having a look at 2 or 3 different providers, make sure they are aligned, and make sure that all of those important topics that we've just spoken about are covered as well, because you might end up choosing a provider that doesn't cover all of the other management type of scenarios that are required for that team member to operate within. So you've got to have that structure, that management structure, just as much. Not to mention, the people that are onshore, could just be superannuation, could be payroll tax, there's so many different elements that come into it that we have here in Australia that you won't have over there.
Yes. So apples with apples between offshore companies, like you say, is really important too, because different benefits and engagement activities attract different people. And certainly you can find low-skilled, unqualified staff really cheaply, but then your results, it's just much harder to get a good result. So it's worth actually investing a bit more in the salary and the engagement to get the right people.
Yeah, well said. Let's talk a little bit about that as we'll probably look to wrap up in about 5 minutes. So if you do have any questions, please drop them into the Q&A and we'll come to those in 5 minutes or so. Let's talk about what you call the people, process, culture engagement. So now you've touched a little bit on that in the last sort of 30 odd minutes. Are you okay to share a little bit more about when you talk about people, process and culture?
Yes, and sorry, I'll just mention one more thing on cost. I think the slide that I presented the last time with the comparison, I do still have that. So if businesses would like me to share afterwards, I'm happy to share it with an accounting Australian firm, costs versus offshore. So sorry, just as a side note.
No, that's brilliant, because there'll be people that probably want to see that. So if anyone wants that, we'll send you a note. You can opt in and come back and say, yes, please, and we'll send that to you. So that's a great opportunity. Well done.
But yes, on the people, process and culture, I would say if you take anything away from today, those are the top 3 things. For most businesses in Australia, staffing is their biggest problem. Finding and keeping good people is the biggest problem for businesses at the moment. And as we touched on, the right person can work from anywhere, and that finding a really good person is so important. But then when you found them, you've got to invest in them. So like we've touched on, paying that a little bit more than market rates for their salary, making sure that they do have additional benefits, like I mentioned, insurances, a meal, transport, those sorts of things, so that you attract good people, that they're qualified and career-minded is really important. They're not just filling in a stopgap, high turnover type of outlook. And you want to just make sure that you're attracting and then able to keep good people. In the end, the cost again comes down to level of experience, because a junior person will be less expensive than a senior. So it's weighing up how much you want to pay for experience versus how much time you want to spend in training them, because regardless of how much experience they have, there is an element of training that will be required, even if they're just learning your processes. So sort of building that into your idea of when you need to look for staff, not waiting till you're desperate, leaving a bit of time so that you can onboard them well, that you can train. And as I say, a junior person will need more training, but that everybody will need to be brought in and, brought in and under your wing and trained as you would somebody onshore.
Yeah, Well said.
And then, yes, I think, sorry, from the process side, it's more if your business is running like a well-oiled machine, and we touched on earlier, offshoring processes that you know how to measure, know how to train are a good place to start to set up for really easy wins, because your business knows how to do them and they know what good looks like. And this, yeah, I can help again with that. If you don't have processes in place, don't let that stop you. You can still look to offshore, even if you go away from today and you just start to record a library of the processes that you do. So just use a Loom recording while you're working to keep a record of what your processes are. In fact, if you've got paid Loom now, you can get it to document your processes. So that's a useful tool to start documenting your processes or recordings. Or if you create a library of processes and down the track you hire offshore staff, that can be part of their role to document the processes. So don't let that hold you back, but it does work easier when you're first offshoring to have processes that the staff are following.
Yeah, I saw to help everyone on this one as well, because some people don't know, well, how do I even start to document some of those processes? I saw something probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago now, where they'd set up just a mobile phone to record what their team members are doing. So it's recording every part, it showed the screens, and that's a starting process. They said, well, that's how we started. And then we got an offshore team to put that into a documented process. And that's how we actually got started. So I tend to agree with you, Delia. You know, there's a lot of people that might say, well, I don't know where to start. I don't have the systems, processes. That could be a simple one. Just set up a little camera on a tripod and record what you're currently doing. There's your system and your process.
Yes. It tends to be a roadblock for businesses because they say it's all in my head, and the hassle of documenting everything, it's just easier to do it myself. So as a bit of a discipline to start recording, and even if you're not documenting, but you've got record, that can be used as a training library as well.
100%. And I'll guarantee you, for those of you online, having done what I've done for a while in terms of coaching, the more that you can document what you're doing and build processes so that it doesn't rely on you, your business will be more valuable when you choose to sell it as well. And then we all go into
your
business.
IP. It's your business, backbone, really, if you've got good processes.
100%. And you'll find that, we often start businesses to one day sell them and realize that investment back, that is about making sure that it's not reliant on you. So if you can build out those processes, get other people, or even work to a strategy of how do I replace myself? That's a great thing to work through. And I'll guarantee you'll find ways which then will make, if you're going to sell your business and one day, you want to realize that back, that will certainly impress any buyer that you're going to work towards. I got one last poll before we look to wrap up. I'll launch that now for you guys, and then great, that's gone. And then if you've got any questions, please throw them into the Q&A. So certainly appreciate everything we've gone through. We're looking to, what are we sitting at, 1:44 Melbourne time. So fantastic. So if that's something that, again, all of you would like more information on, certainly the comparison which Delia spoke about as well, I think that's a really important one. So if you'd like that, or you can throw it into the chat if you want. You can throw it into the questions if you've got questions as well. And we might go to questions before we look to get any parting comments from Delia, and we'll look to wrap up. Do we have any questions? I will take silence as no if nothing's coming through. It's definitely working. Yep, which is good. Ian has raised his hand. Mate, if the Q&A isn't working, you can either put it into the chat as well if you've got a question or something to ask. So please do that, because you won't be able to speak through this particular session because it's a webinar and not a meeting. But that's okay. Look, if there's anything, please continue to throw them in there. I think that's really important. If you've got anything that you want to ask or you want to know, please let us know. Delia, any parting comments before we look to wrap up?
Yes, I would just say again, don't wait till you're desperate. It's a really important one to plan. And sometimes people say, oh, I don't have a full-time role available. I've only got maybe a half a role, half a week. Start then, because then you can onboard, get the staff up to speed, do the training before it's hectic. And then as they're taking work off you or your onshore staff, you'll find you've got more time to win new work, bring in new business, and quickly the role becomes a full-time role. And the other thing with that is if you start early, you don't have to just take the first person because you're desperate. I would say, hire slowly, communicate a lot with the staff and with your offshoring partner. And if it's the wrong person, tell them fast, so that you are not investing a lot of time training someone who you can tell gut feel from the beginning is probably not going to be the right person. So hire slowly, fire fast, and just make sure you've got time so that it's a positive experience for everyone.
There you go. Ian Ross has just said, my offshoring experience has been fantastic with Profitmaster. So thank you, Ian. Thank you. That's a lovely thing to say. Just a quick question. Delia, you spoke about that hiring process. How much time do you think would be involved? I know you spoke about just like here onshore, you'd have a job description and there'd be an ad that then you go searching for that person, then there's an interview process. How far before, if people are looking at their strategy for 2025, from placing the ad to, let's say, having someone start, what are we thinking? What sort of time frame?
Depends on the time of year. So just for example, at this time of year, it's quite tricky because staff don't tend to want to start new roles around Christmas. They have worked for a 13th month check, and sometimes their bonuses and KPIs in place, so they don't want to jeopardize those. In the normal run of things, when you decide to go ahead and we start advertising, we can show you candidates within a week or two, and you would see profiles online first, just emailed to you, and you would choose the ones that you want to actually interview. But then you have to also factor in that if they are working, they will have a 1 month's notice period at their existing role. So there's the finding the right person, and we might not find you the right person straight up. So you might say no, and we keep showing you candidates. Once you do choose someone, there's another 4 weeks before they can start. So again, looking ahead, if you were looking for staff in 2025, I would be starting to recruit now, because you can look and find someone, but specify that you would only want them to start end of January or February. And then applicants, if they see that it's for a February or January start date, will apply for the roles. But to answer your question, I would say anything from 6 to 8 weeks, but for more senior roles, very specialist roles, it can be a little bit longer.
Yeah, fair call. And I know that, I think your point of finding the right person that suits the business, as opposed to, oh, we've already got a pool of people waiting here for you. So very, very different to other models that I've seen out there as well. Well, thank you, Delia. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing. More importantly, I know, again, I've seen it now. I've heard you talk about this 3 times now, and again, there's little triggers that go off in my brain to say this is very good and makes me think about all the things that I should be doing, which is great. To all of you guys that have joined us, thanks again. We've just gone over maybe 5 minutes over or so, but certainly thank you for joining us. And again, for the comments, the thoughts, and the interaction. Certainly appreciate you being a part of this Lunch and Learn panel. I do have, for all of you that have been following my masterclasses, we have our last masterclass for 2024 next week. It's next Tuesday, where we're talking about the partnership model and what's killing the partnership model. If you're an accountant, you'll probably get what I mean. I know we might have different businesses here, but that's what we'll be talking about with my guest, Warwick Havel. We're going to be going into that in a little bit of detail for our last masterclass for 2024. Otherwise, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Delia, again, and signing off till I see you all next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Join us at Profitmaster. Passionate people, passionate careers.